Hello and welcome to this session on the workplace. As the pandemic subsides and the world eases itself out of lockdowns, claims that the office is dead have been overblown. But the health crisis has raised fundamental questions about the wider impacts of remote and hybrid work and the change in working patterns and locations. In this session, we will examine aspects such as the long-term impact of the mass migration to home working, the impact on urban economies, and the financial and social opportunities of a hybrid workforce. I'm Janina Conboye, a writer and editor for the FT's Work and Career section, and joining me for the discussion are Vaughan Klein, Director of Collaboration for Europe, the Middle East and Africa and Russia at Cisco, Stefan Moritz, Senior Expert and Design Director at McKinsey & Company, Kerstin Sailer, Associate Professor in Social and Spatial Networks at University College London's Bartlett School of Architecture, and Loren Shuster, Chief People Officer for LEGO. We will leave time at the end for your questions. You can submit them via the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can also share your thoughts and tweets on social media using the hashtag #FTFutureOfWork. So, to get us started, what is the long-term impact of the mass migration to home working? What will be lost and gained from a social, business and economic perspective? Kerstin, perhaps you would like to start us off on this topic for today.
Yes, absolutely. So I think what we've gained, maybe let's start with this one. That's relatively easy. We've gained a lot of flexibility. So no one would have thought that a mass migration to working from home would have been possible. So that has given all of us a new perspective and the opportunity to see things differently. Research also shows that the working from home experiment has been widely successful for the majority of people. So a lot of people have said they are more productive working from home than they are working from the office. That's not true for everyone, but on the whole, I think it's been much more successful than anyone could have predicted. What I would argue what we've lost with the working from home is a lot of the human touch, the kind of face-to-face interactions, and specifically what we call weak ties. So the kind of, not your strong connections, you can clearly schedule all the meetings in the world you need with your team, but the wider community, the bigger organization, feeling connected to each other, and that human connection to the weaker ties, I think that's something we have lost. And if we think to the role of the office, the physical workplace, a lot of those kinds of weak ties, they come automatic. The office just provides them as a spillover. And that also includes the human need for us to engage with one another, to have a chat with the person doing your coffee, and to, kind of say hi to the reception staff, or to bump into each other on the corridor. There's also research suggesting that the most important good ideas come from someone inside your organization, but outside of your initial team. So those wider contacts is what we've really lost. And so we might be looking at, we could call that a potential innovation deficit. The problem that we don't quite know who we need to talk to in order to get inspiration and new ideas. And because we don't bump into people in the office, we might be losing out on those kinds of unplanned encounters, new ideas, the innovation, the feeling of community.
And Vaughan, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, I didn't expect for us to be where we are right now 12 months ago. And by that, I'll give a frame of reference, and that is the economies of the Western nations are accelerating. The Bank of England just announced that the growth of the UK economy is going to be the best that it's ever been in 70 years, at greater than 7%. The Federal Reserve in the US, they're growing at 6.5%. The country of my birth in Australia, they're at 9.25%. So we've got this extraordinary economic growth, which says, there's things that may be lost, but there's an awful lot for organisations to gain. And that's if they act, if they do something And let me explain that if I could. We're probably pretty familiar with reading the papers to see what's going on in real estate around the world. At the moment, there's a real estate boom. There's also obviously a boom, therefore, in construction. And as a result of that, your high school economics of supply and demand, we've got a 400% increase in the price of timber. If we get a booming economy, then those forces are going to come into the average worker, the knowledge worker. They're going to be able to pick and choose who they work for. Everybody's going to be expanding. Everybody's going to be chasing the same pool. And so therefore there's going to be lots of negotiation power transferred to your knowledge worker. And it's my belief that organisations that would be demanding a 100% return to the office are probably going to shed a lot of employees. I think a lot of people are going to say, no, that's not for me anymore, because they'll have choice. Up until this particular point in time, there's a term that everyone's been sort of sheltering in job. In this new economic environment, there'll be lots and lots of choice. So every organisation is going to have a strategy for flexible work or hybrid work. That's going to require HR and facilities and IT to all come together. And we need to accept, that what we did during the pandemic through urgency and necessity isn't a strategy for flexible work, that there's going to be a lot more involved. Most of that was delivered by IT, and they've done a wonderful job of keeping organisations moving, but the other areas that are critically important, like HR and facilities, are really going to have to come into the fore. If you think about it, for a knowledge worker who's looking to join your organisation, and you announce that you have a flexible or a hybrid work strategy, and they go, great, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And you go, well, here's a free piece of software and a laptop camera, knock yourself out. That's not going to be enough. We really need to think about what are the processes, what are the procedures, what's accepted practice associated with how much time do we spend on video conferencing, what's the experience that we want to generate. So I think that if organizations form strategies to deal with a flexible and hybrid workplace, then we're about to enter what could possibly be a golden era for business. But if we don't, then all could be lost. It's quite a dramatic situation that we now are looking at for the organisations looking to what they do to make this a permanent solution, not an urgent solution.
Okay. And Stefan, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, maybe building on what Vaughan just said, I definitely share your point that action is important. And given that nobody has done something like this before, best practice is being written as we speak, there is a sort of uncertainty that's causing people to wait and see what everybody else is doing, and that could potentially be quite dangerous. I think from a human standpoint, we've all been forced into a situation where we were sort of objects of crisis. And as humans, we don't like to be objects. We like to have agency and be part of something. So I think the most important thing right now is that organizations need to get much better at communicating, engaging, and making their employees feel part of shaping the future. That's a big gap right now. But I think what is interesting, many leaders don't have an image what this new place or space actually looks like, right? So we know what we had before, we know what we have now, and we're trying to see this compromise, which is kind of half a lobster, half a hamburger, and it doesn't really work. And collaboration is much more complex than working from home 2 days a week, right? So we need to actually, as leaders, become conductors of a symphony in totally new ways. And I would encourage any organization to find their third place, where it's not about a compromise between home and office, but actually reimagine again. And I think Vaughan is right. There is the same leap in productivity, the same leap in accelerating decision making that we've seen now sort of reactively. I would encourage us to do it now proactively and design it together with people and sort of see a new world where maybe we don't have to work 5 days a week anymore. Maybe we can collaborate. And I think to your point with the weak ties, I think there is also a lot of subtle things that we haven't seen yet as long-term consequences. I agree with you. It's been super amazing to see what we've been capable of, but we need to also recognize people have suffered quite a lot and it's not visible. So I think inclusivity will be really key to redesign employee experience. 60% of people in the US market, for example, can't work remote. So, it's quite easy to sort of talk about remote. Yes, 25% of knowledge workers and sort of office workers can work maybe even 5 days a week from home. But there are a lot of people that can't. So I think we need to rethink a couple of important dimensions, but there's a huge opportunity. Totally agree.
And Loren, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, it's always tough coming after all the other speakers who said many wise and interesting things. But let me start by saying I don't think anyone has any clue how this is all going to end, so to speak. I mean, we have all been forced into one of the largest experiments probably in the humankind in terms of the workplace by being forced, at least knowledge workers, to be forced to work almost exclusively from home. And now we're starting another experiment where the vast majority of companies are going to be experimenting with some kind of hybrid situation. I also want to acknowledge what Stefan just said is, at least in the Lego Group context, we have 3 different groups of colleagues, of workers. We have production colleagues who are simply required to work in the factories. We have salaried or knowledge workers who are office workers who, of course, have choice now moving forward. And then we have a big contingent of retail associates who also need to be working on premise in retail stores. So I think it's super important to appreciate the distinctions between different types of workers, and at least within one organization like the Lego Group, to the best of our ability, avoid creating A teams and B teams and trying to the best of our ability to treat people with a level of integrity to provide them the most amount of flexibility within the context in which they're operating in. Having said all that, there's no doubt that we've learned that a lot can be accomplished outside of the office. But as a few of the speakers have mentioned already, we're not quite clear about what we've given off. And I just build on one of the points in terms of weak ties. I mean, I feel this personally. And Microsoft has also come out with a study and demonstrated that our networks have shrunk dramatically. So I know that I'm spending the vast majority of my time with those that I normally have strong ties with. And I have lost contact with, I used to travel around the world. I used to talk to employees on the shop floor, in the retail stores. I would bump into new colleagues. I would have lunch with them. I would have a coffee. And not only from a social perspective was that critical, but I, as one of the executives of the Lego Group, have lost a lot of data in the process. And I think that's something that we also will start to get a better sense of as we move into hybrid. What is the right balance? But a lot of learning lies ahead.
Okay, and speaking of hybrid, this moves us on to our next topics. So one aspect of working out the hybrid, remote versus office, some businesses have already decided to reduce their footprint. Some more are likely to follow. So, what impact does this have on urban economies, and how might urban economies evolve as these changes take place? Vaughan, perhaps you would like to pick up on this.
Thank you. I think it's going to be significant. There was a gentleman by the name of Roy Amara, who was a researcher at Stanford back in the 1960s. He had a master's degree in arts, and he had a PhD in engineering. So he had a pretty broad reference point. And he said something back in 1960 something that was sort of so sort of profound, it became known as Amara's law. And what he said was, when addressing IT, that we tend to overestimate things in the short term and we underestimate the impact of them in the long term. Now, if we fast forward, that statement to 40 years later with the dot-com bubble. So at the point of time in 1998, 1999, 2000, the dot-com bubble was expanding on what the internet could be, and then of course it burst, and everything came shrinking back down. And at that stage, the Nasdaq peaked at about 5,080, being sort of the representative of tech stocks. But from that point onwards, from the year sort of 2000 through to where we are today, we didn't have any concept of just how pervasive the internet would be for our lives. We overestimated in the short term, but we grossly underestimated for the long term. The Nasdaq's now through 13,000. It's really quite an extraordinary journey that we've been on. And so following on from the .com, we can apply the same sort of metrics of those underestimation and overestimation to the pandemic. The first thing that I would say is the overestimation that we're seeing in the short term is organisations or people that might say we don't need an office. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think there is still definitely a place for the office in some form. Will the office be reduced in size? Quite possibly. Yes, I think that's a significant probability that we'll see that, but we will still need an office. But then the underestimation on the long term would be, we've just witnessed, the greatest decentralization of the workforce since the industrial age, since the 1820s. Since the 1820s, we've been moving workers from agriculture into city centres, building offices, building factories, consolidating all of the services around them. Hospitals, rail lines, retail services have all been centralized. And then within a period of 14 months, we said, well, actually, maybe we don't need to have so much centralization. The fact that we can sort of do a combination of both. And I think what we saw with, a 200-year period of centralization of us growing into larger and larger metropolitan centres is we saw sort of a disparity of wealth too. Most of the wealth was generated into the cities and it wasn't allowed into the regions. And so if we look forward, I think what we'll see is more balance. We'll see more balance. We don't have to go to the cities in order to work well if you're a knowledge worker and not a factory worker, but to work well, to be productive. And so they'll see a redistribution to what's possible that'll bring in whole countries rather than just the 200-year period of further and further consolidation into metropolitan centres. Here at Cisco, we've been reducing our office footprint by 50%. Now, does that necessarily net us a savings? It doesn't, because what we're utilising that time or that expense is to the provision of wonderful hybrid and work environments in the homes of people, so that we transfer the costs from a fixed cost based upon corporate real estate to a fixed cost based upon the provision of the technology and the environment that we have in people's homes.
And Stefan, what are your thoughts on this? How do you think urban economies might evolve?
No, so I think most CFOs immediately thought, oh, the office is empty, maybe we can cut back a little bit. And I think there is realistic savings of 30 to 50%, and many are looking at it. However, like you, Vaughan, many are reallocating it rather than cutting. Mm-hmm. I would always say, the future of the office might not be an office, because those that come to the office or to the central workplace, whatever that becomes, the worky stuff you can do on the train and at home. So we need to sort of almost reimagine what that place is. And in some countries, when in the late summer 2020 things opened up a little bit, when we did research, a lot of people were actually quite disappointed that this beautiful social buzzing place that they remembered wasn't actually like that. There were still a lot of restrictions. You had to walk around one direction. You couldn't connect. And actually, most of your day, you were in a broom closet doing, video calls, because that's where everybody else was. Even you were a group that was in that day. So you didn't have the social, you didn't have the serendipity, but you also didn't have a productive, I'm actually working in my video setting. And so many organizations that were extremely modern and had an open, flexible, theme-based working environment, they don't have a lot of Zoom rooms now. They kind of the most forward working companies are actually behind now. And so I think we almost need to think about those spaces as theater scenes where we can learn fast. And the new thing will be to be so attractive that people want to come to the office, because otherwise you lose belonging, you lose your brand. 70% of executives in one study told us that they are thinking they will have a lot more temporary workers. I mean, that kind of makes sense that you would think about that. And I almost think employee experience at the great facilities is going to be even more important for people that are not on your payroll, because you want to keep continuity, you want to keep that knowledge. So you need to work actually harder for the people that don't even work for you. So I think a lot of things that we have never thought about like that will come up. And redistributing that saving is one thing, but it is actually embracing the fact that this is a really big shift. There are a lot of ethical questions, there are a lot of legal questions. Are you responsible when people are at home? So, and I mean, somebody said it earlier, I really believe we need a new collaboration between HR, facility, admin, digital. I think that's really important, how we sort of join forces around some of these complex topics and make sure that we are actually shaping this forward. Think through the crisis. What do we want it to be in 5 years from now? Create an aspiration. How would we like it to be, and then try to learn as fast as you can and outlearn your competitors. I think that whole muscle of being adaptable and be resilient, be sustainable, that will be hugely important as a competitive advantage.
And Kerstin, what are your thoughts on this?
If I can build on some of the points that Stefan and Vaughan have made, I think what we will see is a lot more multiplicities of space and spaces, so different things happening at the same time, and things that we're not going to move ahead in kind of a single track, one direction. There won't be a single answer, as in this is what's going to happen with the office, this is what's going to happen with urban economies. Are they on the up? Are they on the down? I think there will be lots of things happening at the same time, and some of those will seem contradictory, or there will be paradoxes. So, for example, I think there will be a lot more focus on the local, on your kind of immediate locale, your neighborhoods. There's been a lot of talk of the walkable cities, the 15-minute city, the idea that you have everything in walkable distance around you, that you need less motorized traffic, hugely important for the climate emergency we're also facing. So I think there's a lot of, kind of kudos to that idea of the local. At the same time, I think we're seeing very interesting, kind of global effects. Things have become more local and more global at the same time. So in my work, one of the things I do is go on conferences, and online conferences are the most soul-destroying thing you can imagine, where previously you would have gone to beautiful places, been hanging out with colleagues from all over the world for 5 days. I would have been due to travel to Washington next month, and I had a conference lined up in Barcelona for August, and one for Naples in September. Now they'll all be online. And an online conference just basically means, 3 to 4 to 5 days of endless one Zoom session after the other, by which point in the evening you're just brain dead. You've lost your will to live, quite honestly. And so that kind of what it allows, though, and despite all of the pitfalls and the downsides of this, what it allows is a lot of people coming in and joining the conversation. So it's leveling the conversation to a degree that I've not seen before. Also with regards to power relations and seniority. So typically in a conference, the keynote speech, is the big professor at the front giving, his or her highly valued thoughts. And then the Q&A afterwards is where all of the other senior people then get up and ask very intelligent questions, and all the junior people in the field, they kind of duck and listen, and they don't dare to speak up. When these events happen on Zoom, it's really refreshing to see all sorts of people typing in their questions into the chat bar, because it's a leveler. And some of the seminars we've had people from all over the world suddenly being able to join in, those that are not situated in London. So there's all sorts of things that I think are happening at the same time, and then they're never just good or just bad, and they're never just neutral. They do things, but I think we have to get ready for that level of complexity and for the kind of multiple things happening at the same time, and just embrace the different levels of opportunities that come with them, but also work very actively to mitigate some of the disadvantages that come along with them.
And that moves us on to our next topic. So, how can businesses leverage the financial and social opportunities of the hybrid workforce? So, perhaps Loren, you could take the lead on this.
Well, I could share a little bit about how the Lego Group is thinking about it, to give you just very concrete example, and maybe to bridge with the previous question. I mean, we are not reducing our real estate footprint, fortunately, because our business is growing and we anticipate that it will continue to grow. So we're very fortunate in that regard, but also because and this is where companies have to also stake out some belief systems. And it's our belief system that the office will continue to play a vital role in building our culture. We want to be a company that people want to spend time together, that people want to congregate. At the same time, we are providing flexibility. So we refer to our hybrid model as the best of both. But I think this is where some trade-offs are going to have to be made and understood. And while I appreciate the arguments that are being made in a lot of the media, that if companies, insist that people come back, even if it's for a few days, they're going to lose talent. I think there's some truth to that, but it's a little bit of a narrow lens. I think people make choices as to where they work, their allegiance to companies, based on a variety of different variables, and just isolating one variable and saying, this is now the definitive one. If a company doesn't allow me to work 5 days from home, I'm not going to work for it. I think it's a little bit narrow, a narrow perspective, because we also know that what is so critical to employees in selecting the companies they work for is purpose. Does the company that I work for have a purpose that I believe in? Does it care for the planet, as an example? Does it have a strong sustainability agenda? Do I believe in the business? Is it going to grow? Am I going to just work for a company I don't believe in because they allow me to work from home 5 days a week? So I think the decisions that workers are going to make is multifaceted, and I think that's just a watch out when we have these discussions. And maybe the last point is, just continuous research is going to be, and data analysis is going to be required. So based on our data analysis so far, we've defined 5 reasons, and this is what our employees are telling us, why being in a common workplace is important: collaboration, social interactions, creative thinking, group learning, and connecting to the company and the values. And we simply don't believe that you can address those by allowing a critical mass of your employees to be remote 100% of the time. So I think, but that may change over time, and I think companies need to be prepared to stay attuned to how it's evolving.
And Stefan, to bring you in, what do you think, how can businesses leverage these financial and social opportunities as we sort of find our way in this new sort of hybrid world?
I mean, I definitely agree that learning and tuning into employees is important. And of course, everybody is coming to us, asking for the golden formula. And I think it is in a way unfortunate that everybody has to figure this out, but it is also the opportunity for every single organization. I agree that purpose is even more important than ever before. There are many things like that they existed before, but they haven't been fully acknowledged to the true power they have. And now when LinkedIn ads are going up through the roof, and most people are reflecting and thinking about their jobs, like quite many, the number one thing to figure out is who are the employees you actually want to keep, and connect with them. Now, having worked with service design 20 years, I know that you can't ask people what they want. And in this sort of big choice and big uncertainty, this is a real problem. The only thing I can say with certainty, you don't figure it out in a boardroom with lots of white men, thinking it up in PowerPoint or on a whiteboard. You need to engage people, you need to co-create with people. But of course, you can't just ask everybody what they want. That's not going to fly. So curating that process is really important. And I think many leadership groups have not understood what's coming. We've seen a similar thing when many organizations moved to Agile, that leadership was actually the biggest unlock in really, there are other ingredients as well, but that's sort of the big shift. And we worked with one organization last fall that had spent many weeks discussing, a little bit like you said, what are the guardrails, what should be our policy, what do we communicate? And it was all theoretical. And we then put them on a time travel. We sent them virtual reality goggles, and we had made films like scenarios with the personas that we based on the real research of what is important to their people. We looked at trends and sort of told stories from the future. And it was really moving them to a different place. At that time, they couldn't be physically together. So it was like an alternative of the board basically being in the same room and seeing what could happen if they take the decisions they were about to take. And there was one lady that had now chosen to care for her mother at home because with remote working she could. But her new manager had actually sort of a preference that she should be part of the team in the office. That's much more convenient. So, how do you have guardrails that protect somebody that has a manager change? And, you can't just delegate that to the local line organization. And in the end, we had these personas step forward and tell them, I've joined this company because we had inclusivity as an important value, and I just feel disappointed in the organization. And people were just realizing what is at stake. And that was an hour workshop, but it has turned 10 weeks of discussions into something profoundly changing the dynamics and how decisions were made. And I think every organization should take the time to immerse with what really matters for their people, to also reflect what really matters for their business and negotiate a win-win and have a clear aspiration and then learn your way forward towards it.
Okay, well, I'm conscious of time, so we're going to move on to our final section of today's discussion. So how can we imagine the future of the office? What might it look like? And also, are we in danger of returning to what we had pre-pandemic? So maybe, Vaughan, you could start with this one.
Well, thank you. Some great topic of conversation here. Kerstin's use of the word multiplicity I'm going to be taking with me. I really, really like that. And I also want to highlight what Loren said about people have got to want to come back. We've got to create an environment where they want to participate. The word hybrid means home and work. And in fact, it actually now means everything in between, because we're going to be moving in between those two cycles. So prior to the pandemic, the buzzword was mobility, and we've forgotten about that right now, but it's about to come back too. How do we do these things in a mobile environment? But if you want employees to come back into the office, and I totally agree. I think we do. I don't know that there's an advantage in a 100%, not in the office environment. Maybe for a period of time of focused work, or as a result of the fact that you've just got a young family, and so therefore that's a better way for you to manage. But ideally, we're going to see a balance between the two, and we're going to want to have them come to the work, and so we have to provide a working environment that they want to engage in. Now, what we've been hearing is the reason that people come to the office is because we get to meet other people. We get to see them, and we get to collaborate with them, and we get to participate. So I think a more traditional office of the battery hen environment, everybody's sitting at a desk and slaving away in front of their computer is not the office of the future. What we're going to see is these offices created with multiple meeting spaces, stand up, sit down, the concept of the huddle. We're going to see formal and informal. But what we are going to have to do is dramatically increase the amount of meeting spaces and the types of meeting spaces that we have for people to want to come to the office. Interestingly, when we were reducing our footprint by 50%, but we were significantly enhancing our meeting capacity, we saw the badge-in rates go up. We saw employee engagement go up. So in an environment at Cisco where we have an entirely flexible working environment, more people were choosing to come to the office because of the meeting environment that we created. Now, where that's got probably amplified during the course of the last 12 months is, even though people are coming to the office and they would like to be together and we've got good meeting room technology, the likelihood of somebody not being able to be there and you're having a virtual participant is nearly 100%, 95, 98% chance that you got some, and they must still be included. And so the technology that you provide that bridges the distance between somebody who can't be there and the people that are there is going to be really, really important, that we have, to the words used previously, inclusion. There's no second-class citizen in a collaboration session that it's dependent upon their location. We simply can't accept that. Location we remove. Office environments we enhance, that even if you can't be there, then you're going to get an experience that's as close to being there as we possibly can. So for us, that's sort of what we're thinking about, and we're encouraging our customers to think about. Make that office environment really, really inclusive, and hybrid work will come to life, and you'll get the best of both worlds.
And Kerstin, what do you think the future office might look like?
If I imagine the future office, what I see is a big social hub. If you host a party in your home, where do the best parties take place? In the kitchen. For me, the image I have in front of my inner eye of the office is much more like a kitchen than the sea of desks that we used to have. So 70% of the office footprint used to be kind of dedicated workstations. I think we'll have to move away from that. So if we think of the office as a social hub, then we can also think about the different kind of reasons and rationales to come in, a lot more diversity of settings, a lot more, if I need to do a quick conference call with someone, I need to be in a phone booth or somewhere where I can speak in private. So a lot of, and again, I'm coming back to that, kind of many things happening at the same time. I might be on the office physically, but as Vaughan has said, some of my colleagues might not be. So I need the opportunity to, kind of tap in and out of virtual and physical all the time. The other thing I think we need to get our heads around is to not think about the office as a finished product. So particularly in architecture and in real estate, once you build a wall, you've built a wall, and that's a wall, and that's a wall, and that's a wall. I think we have to move away from that idea that the office is this one finished product, and we're not going to change it in the next 30 years. That's the lifespans that facility managers have been thinking about. I think we have to think in shorter lifespans and being more willing and able to prototype, to try things out, to collect data of what we've tried out, of what works and doesn't work, and then adapt and change. So to make design more evidence-based and more data-driven, and to really move away from this idea that the office is this one-time finished product that we'll deliver and then it will be there. And I think we have to think about it in in a constant, continuous, changing kind of form. People call this the continuous beta, or other people have called it the hackable office. So there's lots of different terms for that. But I think the idea that, because we don't know, we know so little about what's going to happen in the next year. If you'd asked people last year, they wouldn't have thought 2021 we'll still be in such a pretty bad place around the globe, right? A lot of us would have thought, let's forget 2020, but then we'll be off to better shores, and yet we're not. So I think we just need to be a bit more open and adaptive, and that includes the real estate and the physical workplace environment.
Right then, well, we now have some time to take questions from our audience. So we have a few in. Who shall we go with first? Let's have a look. There's one question. Are there studies indicating that the remote environment actually increases the social interaction and engagement score of employees? Who would like to pick up on that one?
Well, I could speak to at least what's happened during the pandemic, but I don't think it could be necessarily attributed, or the attribution modeling is a little bit more complex. But within the Lego group, our engagement scores have gone up during the pandemic, and I know that's true from our vendor of many organizations by an average 1.5 or 2%. What becomes much more difficult is to attribute that purely to the variable of being in a remote situation. For some that may be, but for others it could be the condition of the business, the purpose of the business, the way in which the individual team or line manager has responded. So I think we'll only know the answer to that question when we emerge from the pandemic and people are given a choice whether they could actually leave their house or not, and what patterns emerge from that.
Yes. Would anyone else like to come in on that? No? Okay.
Maybe just briefly.
Yeah, sure,
I don't think there's many studies on that just yet. Leesman are collecting a lot of data on the working from home experience, and I think the question moves together the social interaction and engagement scores, and I think those two are two quite distinct types of things. You can be engaged while being remote, but I think the social interaction is much more difficult to be doing, because you don't have so many. Everything has to be scheduled, and once it's scheduled, you only schedule conversations and interactions with people that you deem important enough to be talking to. And it will be very socially awkward if I pinged an email to a lot of people saying, could we just have a quick kind of catch-up meeting? I don't have anything necessarily to talk about, but just thought it would be nice to hear your voice again. That would be really weird. So I think those two I would discuss separately, and I would agree with Loren that a lot of that is yet to come in our understanding of how actually remote as a choice works rather than remote as an enforced mode. And also, social interaction has suffered so much in the pandemic because of all sorts of other contact limitations and restrictions and distancing. So we've just felt so much more lonely, because I couldn't just see my work colleagues. I couldn't go to sports. I couldn't see my friends. So there's all sorts of things that have come at the same time. So I don't think it's easy to answer that just yet.
No, I totally agree. It's one super interesting learning vector going forward. I think, when I think about the work that we do on research and creativity, running workshops, we learned so much in the last year or so that, you don't know what you should be looking for kind of learning. And I think, for example, people that in a normal meeting environment aren't very vocal on, for example, a Miro board brainstorm are a lot more active. So there are a lot of things that we never really looked into that this has now revealed as sort of hidden benefits. I also remember in one research, somebody told me, I don't need to socialize with all these people at work. I have actually real friends. So it is also sort of changing a little bit. Are you just forcing yourself to be social because you have to? And one example, or one experiment I'm doing with our team is that instead of me taking the 30 colleagues that I have working on employee experience and customer experience, we normally hang out, where we're actually going to host sessions based on passion. So tomorrow I'm taking a team rock climbing, and they are from all over the company. So there's so much to learn, and I think this is one of the great topics that we should really embrace as a sort of learning experiment.
Vaughan, do you have any thoughts on this, or shall I go to the next question?
Go to the next question. I think the other learned colleagues here have got far more reference points, I think, in terms of research than I've seen in relation to what's happened recently.
Okay. Well, another question then. Who is best equipped to lead the convergence of people, place, and technology in large companies?
I'll start here, but I think Stefan's probably going to have a view on this. He's seeing it all the time as well. There's a whole new category that's emerged as a senior executive, as a professional, and they'll have the title workplace directors. That seem to be sort of the fusion between HR, facilities, and IT. That the competing priorities that they may have around deployment and/or cost. Seems to have constrained organizations' capacity to adapt. And so there is this new executive that, increasingly is, knocking on our door, and I'm having increasing conversations with in my day-to-day work, which, have some element of workplace in their title. I think if you went back 5 years, you probably wouldn't have seen that convergence of an individual that's trying to span those three particular parts. But nonetheless, each element is critical in its nature, but they seem to be forming under a new executive that has significant power within the organization to adjudicate between competing properties in order to have, employee experience at the forefront of their mind.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, my answer would have been whoever steps up first, but appreciates it's a coalition that they need to build. The ones that are trying to do it by themselves fail relatively quickly, but the worst are the ones that are trying to lead it in three places and there is no convergence. And that is, unfortunately, in most organizations, more or less going down because it's not been clear who is in lead. And not all cultures are situated or, suited for somebody to actually step up and be collaborative. So I think most likely the answer, there has to be the CEO. Like if as a CEO, you don't take this seriously and you don't create the environment where you help people step up and collaborate, it's going to be wasting a lot of time, which you don't have.
Yeah, and I think what's happened is the notion of employee experience has now gone beyond where it traditionally resided, which was in HR. And I think now different parts of the organization start to share in a much more meaningful way the accountability for the employee experience. And I agree that there's, new expertise emerging, whether that's from facilities or from the digital technology teams, to look at the intersection of the three areas of HR, of digital technology and workplace. But it is all around providing employee experiences to meet employee demands and the external marketplace demands.
Okay. Yeah. Well, unfortunately,
and I think employee, sorry.
Very quickly, because we only have like a couple of minutes left.
All right. Shall I do a quick one? What I find interesting is that employee experience, employee experience isn't only an outcome, it's also a way of getting there. And I think that's where it's exciting to look at how we learn, how we work, culture and leadership, and the physical or phygital workplace together from an employee experience unlock. Okay. It's going to be really exciting.
Great. Okay, well, unfortunately, that is all we have time for. Thank you to all our speakers today. It's a pleasure to have you join us. For those watching, the session will be available on demand for 90 days on the event website. And do join our next session, where the FT's Work and Careers editor Isabel Barrick and FT US editor at large Gillian Tett have a fireside chat about what anthropology can teach us about our workplaces.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.